So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
What does it mean when Thailand bans Pornhub, along with 190 other sites, including gambling and other pornography websites? In fact, Thailand was in the top 20 countries who used Pornhub the most in 2019. And as we know, Thailand is well known for its sex tourism destination and the sex trade. In fact, my own community growing up and other communities I've lived in, probably because I worked in the pro-life movement, so we worked close to women in crisis pregnancy, we saw undercover investigative stings performed in local, small, average, everyday communities where there were women from Thailand being sexually exploited. And so I find this story riveting when we hear that actually their own government's saying, hey, we've had enough. Let's ban Pornhub. What's the significance of this? I'll tell you in just a moment. Joining me in a little bit will be Stella Morabito, and her background is absolutely phenomenal. She's worked for the CIA. She specializes in Soviet propaganda. She talks about how all of this is geared towards social isolation. And essentially, the gender movement is using this same exact propaganda and tactics to isolate people from relationships. That's right, we'll be talking about identity politics and political correctness. You can't get more PC than that here today. You name it, we're covering it. We'll also discuss what does it mean to be female in light of so many conversations confusing us about our sexuality. Back to this Thailand story, and if you're just joining us, you can join the conversation by giving me a call at 1-888-914-9149, or head over to my Instagram. You can find me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. So Thailand has banned Pornhub. Why is this significant? I think the goal here is that Thailand has recognized that there has been this massive sex trade that they are well known for, and they're seeing within their own culture the degrading understanding of the human person, the decline in marriage and fertility rates. And many countries are saying we have to do something about it. We're seeing many of the European areas who are saying, wow, something's wrong. We see Hungary, Italy, and other places offering incentives for people to get married and have children. Well, not only are places offering incentives, but they're actually taking away things that were being offered in the public domain, including online. In fact, even states here in the United States have deemed the pornography issue a public health crisis. So now here Thailand is, and I think that their goal here is to really regain a proper ethic about intimacy. Essentially, by banning Pornhub along with other sites, they've actually acknowledged that this is falling underneath their country's Computer Crime Act, and they're calling porn illegal. Why? Because they're saying it's improper behavior. It's causing improper behavior among young people. So by banning Pornhub and other states who are addressing the pornography issue, they're trying to give young people, in particular, a fighting chance at what love is, rather than turning to this utilitarian mindset where we just use other people. We use technology to use other people. Oh, but it's only an image. It's only a video. No, there's another person. There's a soul. There's a human behind this act. And that's why it impacts us so deeply as well when we engage with the content. And so props to Thailand for cracking down on the pornography issue. I think we're going to see more of this worldwide as people see people aren't getting married. We're struggling with not only social interaction, but social isolation, which we'll be talking about in a little bit here with Stella Morabito. I also want to discuss the news that, I don't know about you, I've told you, I've quit my television. We got rid of it when we moved a couple months ago. Not that I can't, if there's something that I need to be up to date on, we have those lovely tablets and everything. But I have to tell you, I don't miss it. I don't. I think I maybe watched half a movie and then one full movie, and not even that I would recommend it. We talked about on the show back in September's Cuties on my laptop just for the sake of research to understand what the creator of Cuties was actually trying to claim she covered in the show or in the movie, which she didn't. Now, Jane Austen is coming to the CW in 2021. The classic Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and others are going to be adapted and sexed up for modern trends, also addressing the inequality in the culture. So, a new modern-day take on Pride and Prejudice. Nothing's new, but I think that we might be a little more horrified than some of the other modern takes. And even in their own communication about what their goal is with this new series, they want to address inequality. They want to spice it up and adapt it for modern eyes and modern minds. But this makes us beg the question, why do we love Jane Austen in this classic literature? Well, Jane Austen and her stories, such as Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and others, tell us honest things about romance, attraction, and our own prejudices. We can even tell from the story, for example, of Pride and Prejudice, which will be the first of 6 readaptations that will be covered on the CW. We can look at Pride and Prejudice and even see, for example, relating it to the dating game today, how we can rule out a good potential mate and romance. And even before it's even begun, create a long-term or totally delayed impact in ever allowing for a relationship to flourish. I've seen this among my generation. Oh, I could never date him. I would never want to do that. I don't like X, Y, and Z. Isn't this the story of Darcy and Lizzie in Pride and Prejudice? And isn't this the story of so many people today? I need to marry someone from a different area, from a different culture, who has this or that. Not that we shouldn't have ideals, but sometimes we close the door to potential suitors and romance just because we have prejudices that don't allow us to see people for who they really are. And so this is part of what we love about Pride and Prejudice. Ultimately, the bigger picture is this. We're losing this sense of love of classic literature. We're having to adapt and change everything to the modern mindset, when in reality, classic literature really speaks to human nature, what we love, what we wish, long for, desire, and struggle with. I think of some of the first written texts, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that battle of the human person, specifically man, and the need for competition, the need to be called into a mission and challenged to more. Think of the stories of Pride and Prejudice and the Odyssey, and how they speak so greatly to human nature. There's a great harm when we always have to adapt stories to our modern desires. Essentially, we lose sight of eternal truths, and we chase after modern-day adaptations of everything to place ourselves in a sense of comfort because, well, I'm not really that different from what I see here. Versus in reality, this is what's so profound about literature. We can read about the lives of people 50 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and say, wow, human nature hasn't changed that much. However, perhaps there are some things that they got wrong back then, or we are getting wrong right now, and we can compare and contrast them to one another. In fact, I was going to say Aristotle, CSW, CSW, my brain, oh my gosh, C.S. Lewis, there we go, it's coming out correctly now. I'm looking at CW. C.S. Lewis actually talked about how for every book of the modern time that we read, we should read a few books of a different era, because then we can compare and contrast and understand the propaganda of our times, the way of thinking, the faulty thinking, the good things that come up in our modern day and the things that were good before. And it really encourages us to grow as people and not to be in this narrow-minded box of just what other people think around me right now. This is important in order to form our character and to grow into our identity as male and female in a culture that has really tried to create an ambiguous sense of what it means to be a person. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie, heard here on Relevant Radio. Now, talking about confusion regarding the human person, my guest knows a thing or two about that. My guest coming up here is Stella Morabito. She specializes in Soviet propaganda and worked for the CIA. It's all about social isolation. The gender movement is using the same propaganda and tactics to isolate people from relationships. Stella Morabito, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Timmerie. First, I just want to correct one thing. I'm a former analyst, in the intelligence community. That was previous work, not current. That's all. I just want to correct that.
Excellent. Yes, we said you
but
worked
thank you.
for the CIA.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. So let's dive into how you've seen similarities between Soviet propaganda and gender ideology, specifically having to do with identity politics.
Okay, well, I wouldn't say necessarily Soviet propaganda. I would say propaganda in general, of which, the Soviets were masters. But when we think about propaganda, I have a definition that I use. I hope it's not too wonky, but I call it the process by which power elites condition individuals through psychological manipulation to adapt to their agendas. And the psychological manipulation is most effective when people don't have any self-awareness. And I think that, Americans today are woefully unaware of how easily we can be manipulated psychologically because we have a tradition of freedom that has allowed us to kind of become, lax, kind of take it for granted and not expect to be so wildly propagandized. And we haven't had, there hasn't been much awareness of social psychology, mob psychology, and how that works. And so we're we've become very susceptible to being targets of that. And then getting to your point, isolation is key to bringing about control. Even, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Hannah Arendt, who was the political philosopher who wrote the book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. But, when she mentions how loneliness and the sense of isolation is key to bringing about tyranny. So, people need to feel separated from one another. I mean, it's just it's really an old idea, divide and conquer. But we can see it in so many, areas today, that isolation, especially with the enforced isolation as a result of the virus. Being definitely used.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole I would love to go down one time. We'll have to talk about that later because I see the connection here. But how has specifically the transgender movement used identity politics as a weapon for social control?
Okay, well, identity politics, of course, goes way back. Identity politics is the means by which people are divided into groups. And this idea of gender identity is just one of many. I mean, you have like critical race theory that uses race as to divide us.
Everyone's separated into a different subgroup.
Right. Or radical feminism. Of course, then gender identity kind of muddies that as well, because you have radical feminists who have a problem with gender ideology and transgender, the push of transgenderism, through the culture. Especially as it kind of destroys women's spaces. But identity politics is really just a tool that's used to separate people. All of these, the people who really use, I'm sure there are a lot, I know there are lots of true believers. And of course, there has been racial discrimination and discrimination in so many other areas. But that's not really, race. When it comes to identity politics, or let's say critical race theory or extreme feminism, and the people who push these ideas, and especially gender identity, especially when it comes to children in schools, it has nothing to do with discrimination. It has nothing to do with that. The whole purpose of it is to separate people into groups so that they take on an identity that is either as an oppressor or a victim. And people in the oppressor groups can try to buy themselves a little acceptance by their self-appointed masters by allowing themselves to be tagged as, quote, allies of the victims. So that's how it works. You're either an oppressor or a victim.
Right. It reminds me in many ways of how social media used to be this massive area where people can throw ideas out and everyone can communicate and chat and share and exchange. But now the algorithms on many of the mainstream social media, such as Facebook and Twitter, has it so that you hear more of an echo chamber. You hear and follow more of the similar kind of people. And so even on social media, there's been this almost segregation into various types of groups. We've seen this with COVID, gender ideology, identity politics, whether you're religious, non-religious, even the type of religion that you follow. We're seeing all of these breakdowns in society that have led ultimately to that isolation that you talk about, but really to the point where we can't even really communicate with one another anymore.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's really bad. And yet, people yearn for that. They're starving for it. When it comes to totalitarians and their agenda, the idea is to put people on a starvation diet of relationships so that eventually the state would become their prime relationship. They become so dependent upon, the bureaucracy or whatever that they just take whatever crumbs might be thrown their way. That's usually the way that ends up working or not working.
Now, this has led to ultimately this state-enforced identity, which we've seen through public education and team sports, where you are not unique. There's nothing special about you. You are not more talented than anyone else. In fact, everyone gets a trophy. Everyone wins. There's no winner of a game. Do you think this has contributed to this transgender agenda of kind of everyone just being the same?
Well, I think when you put kids into a controlled environment, like, what I call a mega school, where everybody is regimented, that definitely contributes because they're so susceptible to the social pressures and the fear of being rejected by peers that, everyone gets a trophy. Yeah, that probably, like you're all part of a group and you're not a unique individual. Yes, that contributes to it. For sure, because gender identity, the other thing that people need to understand about transgenderism is all of the laws that have been written as supposedly to prevent discrimination really identify each and every one of us, when you read the laws, as transgender. Because it's all based on the premise. You will find in every single one of these laws, whether it's municipal or state or, the so-called Equality Act, which I know that the next Congress will try to push through again. Right. It's all the premise that everybody's sex is, quote, assigned at birth. That is, they say, they refer to the transgender person, sex assigned at birth. But right. or just arbitrarily assigned, so that but it does that statement is meant to apply universally. It's not meant to apply just to a transgender person. It applies universally to everybody. In other words, written into law, buried in the premise of all of this, is that nobody you're only male or female if you, quote, think you are. And that's extremely dangerous. What it does is erase our biological reality and differences that are really gifts when you think about it. If there are no differences between people, especially that most basic difference in humanity, male, female, all the other differences are nothing compared to that. that is, that allows us to actually develop relationships. If there are no differences, there are no relationships, period. Mm-hmm. If there's no uniqueness, there's no mystery, nothing to exchange with another human being in terms of ideas, And when we get, that's one of the dangers of gender ideology, is it reduces us all to just kind of a blob,
Neutral.
Nobody's
We're
different.
all neutral.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing, there's no, I mean, they would argue with that. But if you do a 30,000 foot approach and look at it, that's a big picture, that there's no differences between people.
Right. And this is so contrary to the Christian worldview, really understanding that each and every single person is unique, unrepeatable, loved unconditionally, created with a purpose, and has the freedom to live according to their God-given identity as the truest path to happiness, but you can default, versus this state-enforced group identity is really causing confusion about who the person is.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody's motives, but those who have come up with these schemes, I believe, see themselves as gods. They want to dictate who's who, and they want to dictate, everybody's identity. That's how totalitarianism works, and yet there's always this little core of privileged people at the top who tell everybody else how to live their lives, and who they are, and erasure of who they are is very dehumanizing. And you're exactly right. It's totally contrary, not just to the Christian worldview, but just to the
Human
ability
anthropology.
to even have a worldview. It erases our ability to see other people as unique. And it creates all kinds of hostilities. It's very dangerous stuff. And the fact that it's being imposed on children it's criminal.
I'd like to come back in talking about that a little further, the impact that the social isolation and this identity politics has essentially had on kids, and how this has ultimately led into political correctness. My guest today is Stella Morabito. We're going to unpack the connection between gender ideology, political correctness, and how these are the same exact tactics that the Soviet Union used to isolate people and create confusion and dehumanize the person. We'll be right back. Don't go away. In the meantime, follow me on social media and let us know what you would like to hear discussed here on Trending. The Relevant Radio studio line is sponsored by Catholic Order of Foresters. Information about employment opportunities and their flexible premium life insurance plans are available at relevantradio.com/forester.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
What is one thing you can do in the morning that could transform your day, but yet, better yet, your character, who you are, how you function throughout the day, how you interact with others? I'll share that with you in just a little bit. My guest today is Stella Morabito. She specializes in Soviet propaganda and worked for the CIA. It's all about social isolation. As I've told you, the gender movement is using the same propaganda and tactics to isolate people from relationships. Stella, I want to unpack how political correctness has been a fundamental dimension of gender ideology and how it's really impacted young people, teenagers and young adults in particular.
Oh yeah, no, it's a huge element of all kinds of leftist or totalitarian policies. Political correctness is really it's a form of agitation. It's it's propaganda too, but I mean it uses propaganda, but it's a form of agitation, and by that I mean it kind of is the action end of propaganda where people are put in a position to especially if all the megaphones in the media are controlled by, or 90% of them, 95%, by those who push these policies, like, for example, the gender identity policy. And the idea is to marginalize, shut down, censor, and basically socially reject anybody who does not express the politically correct view. And this has always been very effective because human beings have a very primal and universal terror of being socially ostracized, rejected, because biologically we can't survive if we're separated from other people.
Right.
And so this is built into us, I believe, that it's, or it's a reflection. Our need for others is a reflection of our need for God. And being separated is, we feel that separation as terror and horror. Any bullied child knows this, how horrible it is. So
psychological manipulation.
Right. And emotional terror. So getting back to Hannah Arendt, she made the point in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. I'll just read this one quote. Terror can rule absolutely only over men who are isolated against each other. Therefore, one of the primary concerns of all tyrannical government is to bring this isolation about. And that's what we're seeing in so many policies, especially that policy. Now, people would say, oh, on the left, or the people pushing gender ideology probably say, oh, no, this makes them more inclusive, and this makes people more, it's more like reaching out to all of the possibilities, which of course, we know that's garbage. I mean, kids can have imaginations. They can imagine all kinds of things. They can imagine being a dragon. Yes, they can imagine being the opposite sex. They can imagine all kinds of things. But kids have to navigate a very scary line, especially by the time they're 3 or 4, between what's real and what's their imagination. And they want to know what's real. And when you have an activist group pushing this anti-reality on small children and even growing children, and basically teaching the other kids that anybody, all of them, that to object to this is to be a bigot and be socially rejected. And so they very early, very easily learn that they have to get with the program if they don't want to be rejected. It's really cruel. It's really cruel what they're doing.
Because it locks children into their imagination, this, simulated world, and it ties into even the issue of pornography, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, the issue of video gaming, and, people would just rather live in a simulation because they're safe there, because if they say anything contrary to what the world says, well, in that sense, they are not safe. And so in order to survive, they have to conform publicly to what everyone else is saying. And what happens still is this is scary from a very human perspective, because it takes the personal dimension out of the human person, where you can't even speak. And then not only do you lose your voice, you lose your connection to other people in a very real and human and free way to love them.
Exactly. That's exactly right. You shut down all communication. It's as though, and I've written about that, it is as though we're all being assigned to virtual solitary confinement. And, through political correctness. And as you have probably read, most of your listeners would know that the punishment that most prisoners fear more than anything is solitary confinement. I mean, you can easily go into a state of psychosis, hallucination. It's frightening. It's chilling. But that's what's happening. And that's one reason why the suicide rate, especially among youth, is spiking, It's why depression and anxiety is spiking. And of course, a lot of other things feed into that, like broken homes, broken families, which of course is another way of separating people, not promoting marriage, not promoting healthy family bonds. That's another imposition of separation and loneliness, often through policies that happen. So it's no wonder there's what they call a loneliness epidemic in our society. But political correctness, unfortunately, we have this regime of political correctness that enforces that kind of isolation. And not just on children. I mean, it's just as bad for like the elderly. Maybe they live in a senior center where, everybody is, trying to, be politically correct because they're fearful of being rejected as well.
Or receiving poor treatment,
and of course, college.
Yeah.
What's that?
Colleges. I said, or even of receiving poor treatment in a nursing facility and so forth. I can't help but go there. We have to. And I'm sure that you have been doing so much work on this. This social isolation is exactly what we're seeing with COVID in an extreme sense. Yeah. You can't even practice your religion. The only thing you can do is be a consumer at the grocery store, at Target, at Walmart, anywhere such as that, on Amazon. But you cannot live out your free will to love others and freely choose to, if you view it that way, to endanger yourself by exposing yourself to people. I mean, I don't know how we've gotten to this mindset where other people are parasitic. It's unbelievable. But this has enforced this parasitic mindset that everyone else is a threat to me, so I need to isolate within the context of COVID.
And wear a mask. I mean, all of this is dehumanizing. But the COVID definitely plays into this because this has set up such a scenario, or how Rahm Emanuel put it years ago, don't let a good crisis go to waste, in order to promote all these social control agendas. And so that's exactly right. Undercover. I mean, this originally, I don't know if you remember back in March, it was only supposed to last 15 days. Make sure that we don't overwhelm the hospitals. Make sure there's enough beds. Oh, well, maybe we need to do an extra 30 days. So the end of April, we'll start opening up again. And now what's happening? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's, the fact that it's almost like it was all a test run, for, a totalitarian system, getting people to agree. Sam Alito, the Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito, just gave a speech. I didn't read the whole thing, but recently, where he talks about how astonishing it is, or how horrible it is that so many freedoms have been abused and trashed. He didn't put it that way, but as a result of, or using cover of basically what amounts to a bad
COVID.
flu.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a bad flu. Remember, I don't know if you remember, but there were days when, someone was out with the flu. The flu was going around. And, the fact that they've managed to test, of course, this is a virulent strain. I understand that. We didn't know everything about it at the beginning, but it's, the numbers are, inflated for so many reasons. I mean, if we tested for some other strains of the flu, like a couple years ago, or sure, you can come up with big numbers when you test every single. But the point is, it's being used. It's being used as a tool for social control and social engineering. No question about it.
And it's so scary, Stella, because we are seeing right here, and because I'm in Southern California, where the governor decided specific counties he didn't think that they were having high enough testing numbers. And so he just shut them down, saying, I'm not seeing the results that I thought I would see in terms of what your numbers look like. And so they're like making up, fabricating, inflating numbers to the point where
wait a minute, you're telling me he's shutting things down because he said the numbers are too low?
One of the counties, yeah. I believe it was Riverside County here in Southern California. I mean, this is the thing. Now, the goal is, this was created right before Thanksgiving and Christmas so that people could not gather. And people are terrified to share what their plans are for a communal holiday coming up on a religious holiday of Christmas, where there's this giving and receiving of the human person that we're being told we can't engage in now. And this is scary, I think, from a perspective of human interaction and this socialist agenda that you're speaking of.
Oh, yeah. No, it's totally dehumanizing. Totally. Anybody who succumbs to that needs to, think harder. I mean, it's horrible. But the COVID and of course political correctness feeds into this whole thing, because to even say that you don't think mask wearing is really effective is to be, like you said, what are they calling people, parasitic or not caring about the lives of other murderers? I've even heard that. It's like being called a bigot because you question. It's the old smear. But there is a real demonization campaign going on against anybody who doesn't get with this politically correct view on mask wearing and social distancing. And it is frightening because it basically means cutting off all human relationships. I don't know if there's any end in sight. I don't know if they have any intention of allowing things to get better, or if the powers that be like it so much, you're just going to keep pushing it. I don't know.
So here's a question. In this cancel culture that we live in, whether it has to do with gender, COVID, you name it, you're not inviting anyone to Thanksgiving this year. How do we combat this social isolation that's occurring and regain these relationships and no longer be afraid to share what we think or what is true?
Right. Well, as you probably know, there's a minority of people who do speak up, and our future depends on that minority leading others to speak up as well. If you've ever been in a situation where you said something that most people wouldn't dare say, that was a truth, you'll have people coming up to you maybe afterwards saying, yes, I'm so glad. But unfortunately, they just whisper that. I'm so glad. I thought I was all alone. Or best case scenario, other people out loud say, hey, yeah, that's right. And then, that kind of shifts the whole dialogue. But there have to be people with courage. There have to be leaders who are not afraid, or if they are afraid, are willing to take the chance of speaking up, because there's so much at stake. And I'll add to that something that Jacques Ellul, that's spelled Ellul. He was a French sociologist who wrote the definitive book on propaganda. It was published in the 60s, and the title was Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes. And there's one simple sentence in that book that sums it all up. And he says, propaganda ends where simple dialogue begins.
And drop. That is an excellent.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way to end it. And sometimes the best way is just one-on-one, face-to-face, where people aren't as affected by the propaganda. And people really do want to be known as unique individuals. I mean, everybody's really starving for that, unless they're totally programmed out of it. But people are receptive to friendship, real friendship. And so if you can get conversations going with, now, not everybody, you might know people are just hardcore, aren't going to agree with you on anything. But then there are many people kind of go along with these things, but are just starving for real conversation. And, to start real conversations with people where they can become more self-aware of these things and know that they're not alone and exchange real ideas, that's what'll save us. And you've got to have millions of these conversations. When you get them started, it can it can cause a ripple effect that gets more conversations started. But that's the key to building relationships and getting out of this rat maze that we've been put in through political correctness and, the whole of which, all of the gender ideology and all of these other, tools of separating us is built.
That's Stella Morabito. Stella, thank you so much for joining us for everything that you do. You can find Stella Morabito at stellamorabito.net. We'll be sure to post links in the podcast notes at relevantradio.com/trending. You can also catch her articles written regularly on The Federalist. I will be right back here on Trending with Timmerie. Sponsorship for Trending with Timmerie is provided by Catholic Singles, a dating app that connects single Catholics based on faith, values, and shared interests. More info at catholicsingles.com.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
I am so excited for Advent and Christmas. In fact, we talked a lot about Advent last week here. So if you want to go catch the podcast, head over to relevantradio.com/trending because I want you to get the most out of this Advent season. It's like Lent, but a different liturgical season. We're called to prayer, fasting, purification, preparation, a rooting out of sin in our life during Advent to prepare for the coming of Christ. Good Lord, I need help because I'm also preparing for a baby, so you can pray for me on my journey as I'm becoming a mom and baby's on her way. We're so excited, but we want you to also have some tools in your tool belt this Advent. It's hard to believe that it's right around the corner. Advent begins Sunday, November 29th, and I have a simple way for you to grow in your faith this Advent season. Sign up to receive Father Rocky's Advent Inspirations. These are short, daily audio reflections designed to help you delve into the beauty of the Advent season. The reflections are emailed to you each morning throughout Advent. They'll help you to start the day with a smile and give you something to ponder. You can sign up for Father Rocky's Advent Inspirations at relevantradio.com/Advent or click on the banner on the Relevant Radio app. I wanted to take a deeper dive into what it means to be female, but we're going to have to save that a little more so for later on this week. But as we touch on this, I do want to at least discuss the news article that came out this past week having to do with how the Oxford Dictionary has redefined woman after an online petition was circulated last year. Wow, this is incredible. Now, at first, the article drew me in because they were doing away with words such as wench. They were part of the definition for women. But I don't know. Some women can be wenches, okay? I mean, that's totally legitimate. And so at first I'm reading the article thinking like, okay, I agree with that. Women shouldn't be called wenches, even though some perhaps do deserve to be called wenches. But I digress here. But then reading into the meat of the article, so they totally hooked me, right? And so then I'm diving in, and next thing you know, it's all, of course, about LGBTQ inclusivity. We want to use more gender-neutral language and allow for that sexual spectrum to flow. And so it's so fascinating. It talked about how one of the definitions was also altered to acknowledge that a woman can be a, quote, person's wife, girlfriend, or female lover. I'm going to tell my husband to just start calling me his female lover. See what he thinks. Okay? I'm going to be like, actually, this is reminding me of my brother at one point. He was dating this girl and they hadn't quite like gotten into this committed relationship yet. They hadn't had the DTR talk to find the relationship talk. And so he kept referring to her as his lady friend because she wasn't a girlfriend. And every time he said that, I'm like, I just can't handle this lady friend business. It was cracking me up. But this is what this gender neutral or all-inclusive language reminds us of. And so when we look at the definition of words today, this is what's scary. We are literally seeing language redefined. Redefined. In fact, one of the statements in the USA Today about the changing of the definition of woman, said our dictionaries reflect rather than dictate how language is used. Then it goes on to say, this is driven solely by evidence of how real people use English in their daily lives. Hold on a second. That should be a big red alert, stop sign, like flashing in your face. Our dictionaries reflect rather than dictate? No, dictionaries tell us what something is. They do not reflect what a 3-year-old thinks a baby is. A dictionary does not reflect what a 3-year-old thinks a woman is. A dictionary does not reflect what a 50-year-old thinks that gender is. I'm sorry, you can't redefine language. And so I wanted to talk about what does it mean to be a woman, but this article, I can't help but say we've got to talk about this because there's this redefinition, this rewriting of a language that is occurring over and over and over again. People don't want you to use the word biological sex to refer to whether or not you're male or female. They want you to use the word gender. And then finally, people in the pro-marriage, pro-male-female movement have pushed back hard enough on the biological reality of the human person that they say, okay, we'll concede sex, but really it's all about how you identify as gender. Because you can feel one thing, you can identify as another, you can be attracted to another. Everything is pure relativism. You define your own reality. And so in other words, I could put a petition out today, petition the Oxford Dictionary, and have the word gender or woman changed, or have the word baby changed to mean my dog. Actually, I don't have a dog. If you know me, I'm not a pet person at all. So if you are someone who believes your dog is your child, I don't care. You can't redefine the Oxford Dictionary, okay? It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't. And so when we talk about words, we need to get to the truth, the reality of what is and what is not. Just like we need to get to the truth, the core of who a person is and who a person is not. Truth really does matter. And as we were discussing with Stella Morabito here on Trending, this is important because we live at a point in history where people are more divided than ever before because they are told what to say, what to think, how to dress, how to conform, and they're told to do so all for the sake of survival. At a certain point, those fight or flight instincts, those cortisol levels, the stress hormone, overwhelms us. And what happens? As Stella pointed out, we are living in a time of unbelievable loneliness, anxiety, and even suicide. This is what happens when we say there is no such thing as truth. This is what happens when we kill God and we say God does not exist. God is real and He created you and I. He created us with a purpose written into our biology. There are limits on our biology. There are limits on our anatomy. There's the fact that I can exercise and lift very differently than a man can versus a woman can. All of these differences, this uniqueness, this purpose, it's good. But what are we doing to communicate that to other people? Are we just going to laugh about how they removed a wench from the Oxford Dictionary to really show that that's a derogatory term for women? Just to be clear here, in case you couldn't use your brain to figure that out. Honestly, do I really have to have the Oxford Dictionary tell me that wench is a derogatory term for women? There are even some other words in here. I better be careful because I want to make sure I know what they are so I won't say them on here before I repeat them out loud. Get myself into trouble here. But before we wrap up the show, all of this comes back to this fundamental idea that we need to work on who we are, being a light of Christ in the world. And there was this excellent article that came out at aletheia.org, and it was talking about how you can avoid a bad habit with this quick morning spiritual exercise. You want to know what that spiritual exercise is? It's embedded in your prayer. And the spiritual exercise has to do with that specific sin that you are struggling with. What is it for you? Because we don't often take that into our next day. Maybe we perform that examination of conscience. If you don't do that every night, start doing it. But then start your day knowing this is a new day, but this is also something I'm struggling with. And my interaction with this person, or this context, this situation, or this location could make it a little more difficult, or a lot more difficult, for me to battle this sin that I'm trying to eradicate from my life. Pray for the graces for God to help you be aware of areas and even people of temptation, for those things that you're struggling with, and ask Him to give you the grace to walk in truth, to walk according to the purpose He has in store for you. This is a part of your morning exercise, a part of your morning prayer that will truly set you up on a path of joy, of goodness, and direct you on that path to be united with God in heaven for eternity, as we are all called to, but we have the choice of whether or not we're going to cooperate with God's graces to make it there. I'll talk to you tomorrow here on Trending with Timmerie. Michael Gasparo is finally back with us.